How's it going, my bakers? I hope you're having a nice day. Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, we're going to be talking about overproofing and underproofing. So let's go to the kitchen and have a closer look. There are three main factors that affect fermentation rate, and depending on one or more of them, your dough could be under-fermented, properly fermented, or over-fermented. And they're all equally as important. Time is one of them. If you don't leave your dough to ferment for long enough, it will not rise. If you ferment it for too long, it will overproof. Ambient temperature. Even if the temperature of your dough is correct, if your kitchen is too warm or too cold, it will greatly affect the fermentation rate. And of course the temperature of the dough itself. If it starts off too cold, it will take a lot longer, and if it's too warm, it might over-ferment. To get a controlled and predictable fermentation, there must be a balance between all of these. And the only way to learn about this balance is by practicing over and over again. In time, you will start seeing patterns, and you will master this. In today's video, we'll make 3 loaves of bread. Normally in my comparison videos, I make several separate breads, but today I'm just making one dough. I'll divide it into 3 after bulk fermentation, so that the only difference between all of them will be the final proof. One will be underproofed, one will be properly proofed, and the final one will be overproofed. And once they're all baked, we'll cut them open and compare them. Quickly about the recipe here. It is a white flour loaf, it's made with a Polish, and it has a hydration of about 63%. If you want all the written details, you'll find them in the link below the video. As ever, this is not a recipe video, this is a comparison video, so I'm not going to talk you through the steps here. What I will talk about is what to look for when fermenting your dough, and how to tell whether it's risen enough. We always hear this basic rule of fermenting it until it's doubled, and for the most part, I would agree with that during bulk fermentation. That's the initial fermentation stage. We'll talk about final proofing in a minute. The bulk fermentation stage is a lot more forgiving than the final proof. Even if your dough is a little bit under, a little bit over, that can be fixed during the final proof. So I would always aim to double the dough. And that is why I always show you the time lapse of it rising, so you can get a good idea on how much volume it should gain. Okay, I'm just doing a quick temperature check here for reference. The dough is about 23 degrees Celsius, and my kitchen is around 25. I've made the dough a little bit cooler. Because it does contain that pre-ferment, it will ferment more rapidly. I'm going to let it ferment now, and halfway through bulk fermentation, I'll give it a fold. Now you can find detailed videos about folding, bulk fermentation, temperature control in the Principles of Baking playlist and in the Steps of Baking playlist. In this video, we're just looking at how big the dough should be. And clearly, it's gone through bulk fermentation and it's doubled in volume. Now I'm going to divide it into 3, pre-shape it, leave it to rest, then do the final shaping and the final proof. Now there are some cases when you don't want to wait for your dough to be doubled during bulk fermentation. This is especially true for low hydration dough, which just doesn't puff up as much. Or a rye bread, for instance, which is dense and doesn't rise much at all. High percentage whole wheat breads with normal hydration levels also have this effect. But speaking of whole wheat, there is another thing that affects fermentation rate, which is the ingredients. Using whole wheat flour in bread dough generally will make it ferment more rapidly. Using ingredients like cinnamon, mace or nutmeg may slow it down. Using a tiny amount of sugar may accelerate fermentation. Using too much sugar will slow it down. You just have to keep an eye on your dough. A very important thing is not to rely on the times given in a recipe. Each of our kitchens is different. We may live in different climates. We may have the heating on, or we may have our windows open in winter for some reason. And that is when you might need to adjust the fermentation time or your dough temperature to begin with. It's funny sometimes when I get comments saying that my recipes don't work. The recipe is just a list of ingredients and basic instructions. It is you who makes it. I mean, it did work for me in the video, right? Okay, so I'm doing the final shaping now, and we'll be moving on to the final proof. So in short, when it comes to bulk fermentation, you just let it rise until doubles. Most of the time. Now final proofing is a little bit different. From left to right, I'm going to ferment the first dough for 20 minutes, the second dough for 1 hour, and the third dough for an hour and a half. As you can see, this barely rose up. We'll get it in the oven and we'll leave the other ones to rise. The second one has filled the tin and slightly risen over it, but it has not doubled in volume. And that's extremely important. You always want to leave some room to grow. If you let it rise for longer, it will not puff up in the oven any further. The yeast may run out of food, and in the worst case, the dough will break down, and we'll see this in just a few seconds. This dough is way over risen. It has become quite sticky, and the gluten structure has begun to break down. There's even little holes forming on the surface, letting the fermentation gas escape from the interior. The dough has become very fragile. It is basically turning back into the Polish that we used earlier. To be fair, this would make nice focaccia, but that is not the point of this video. So it's very hard to tell you how long the dough should be fermented for and what exactly it should look like. You must learn that for yourself. Because if you are an inexperienced baker, and if I gave you each of these loaves separately, you may think that they are perfectly fine. Maybe it's a different kind of recipe and it's supposed to look like this, right? It is only when you bake the same loaf in your kitchen for several times that you will learn to see when it's right and when it's not right. And that is why, instead of telling you all kinds of hacks in this video, I will show you exactly what to look for, especially in the crumb, to distinguish between the dough that's overproofed, underproofed, and proofed to the correct degree. There are some differences on the outside, of course. The underproofed dough kinda looks like it has risen better than the other ones. It has also torn open, and that's most likely because there was too much tension. The gluten had not relaxed enough before baking. Whilst the overproofed one had a flat top, and you can see that it had started spilling over the sides of the tin. It did not rise at all whilst it was baking. Whilst the one in the middle has puffed up nicely and has a nice shape. But here is the most important part, the telltale signs. A dough that is underproofed will quite often have large air pockets on one side and dense dough on the other side. People making high hydration sourdough bread often mistake this for success. It is called fool's crumb. Now on the other side, the overproofed bread, it has fairly large bubbles in the crumb with less dough in between. If we look at the correctly proofed bread now, it has a fine crumb with the bubbles spaced out quite evenly, with a little bit denser dough in between. It looks nice and smooth, and it's a lot softer. Now you see why it's called fool's crumb. The bread is puffed up and torn open, there are big bubbles inside. It almost feels like it should be like that. But when you see those large bubbles surrounded by dense dough, that is a clear indicator of underproofed dough. A fairly even crumb with random air pockets is what you're looking for. Whilst the crumb that is very bubbly, with little dough in between, may just be over fermented. Of course, we can see from the profile too. The overproofed one literally is hanging over the sides of the tin. Saying all that, I would always take an overproofed dough over an underproofed one. Here's another quick example. It is my 100% hydration whole wheat bread. The first batch I made overproofed, and that's on the right. It over-fermented, it broke down, and it deflated through the top. It could not puff up anymore in the oven. The yeast was not active enough, and there was no gluten structure. So there was no more gas being produced, and all the gas that was built up inside just escaped. And we can see the same thing with the crumb again. It has a lot of bubbles evenly spaced out, with a little bit of dough surrounding them. Whilst the correct one is a lot more random. It's not about baking everything correctly the first time. You have to make mistakes to learn from them. And now you know exactly what to look for and how to tell your mistakes apart. So go and make some mistakes and bake some better bread. So what do you think this topic? And what is your experience with overproofing and underproofing? Let me know down in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this one, click over here. Subscribe to the channel, click right here. But that's all I have for you today. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next one.